They say family is forever, but what happens when your own blood treats you like a stranger? I remember the moment I found out I had been cut out of my father's will. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where the world seemed still except inside me, everything was falling apart. My cousin handed me a sealed envelope looking uncomfortable. I didn't understand at first. Why would I get a different letter than everyone else? Inside there was nothing, no mention of me, no explanation, not even $1, just silence. The rest of the family had gathered in the living room sipping wine and exchanging soft condolences. My brothers were already discussing who would take what Dad's watch, the lake house, even the old car he never let anyone touch. No one looked at me. No one asked what I'd received. Maybe they already knew. Maybe they were just relieved. I sat there stunned. Betrayal doesn't always come with loud voices or broken plates. Sometimes it's just an empty space where your name should have been. At that moment, I realized something. It wasn't about the money. It was about being erased. I was the youngest, the one who stayed quiet, who didn't argue at dinner, who took care of Dad when his back gave out and Mom was already gone. I was the one who canceled plans to drive him to his appointments, the one who brought him his favorite tea, the one who sat beside him in silence during those long hospital nights. And still I was forgotten, or worse, ignored on purpose. Why? What did I do wrong? These questions played on repeat in my head, but no one was offering answers. No one came to check on me. I wasn't even asked to stay for the family dinner afterward. They didn't just take me out of the will, they took me out of the family. Have you ever felt invisible in a room full of people who are supposed to love you? It's a special kind of loneliness, the kind that doesn't sting immediately, but digs deeper the longer it's ignored. And here's what hurt the most. They didn't even think I'd care. They assumed I'd go back to my quiet life, that I'd fade into the background just like always. They thought I'd move on, maybe sulk a little, cry in private, then forget it ever happened. But they were wrong. This wasn't just about what I didn't receive. It was about everything I had given and how none of it ever mattered to them. Not once. I didn't scream. I didn't fight. I didn't confront anyone at the reading. I just sat there numb and let them toast to their new inheritances, while my heart quietly cracked in two. But something changed in me that day. There's a moment, a single turning point where pain becomes fuel. And that was mine. I walked out of that house with nothing in my hands, but I carried with me a silent promise. You will not erase me. I won't beg for a place at your table. I'll build one of my own. I won't shout to be heard. I'll let my success do the talking. I won't return with vengeance. I'll return with proof that I was never the weak one. And someday, when you least expect it, you'll realize just how wrong you were about me. Because this story doesn't end with a will. It begins with what I did after they wrote me out of it. The twist, I didn't just move on. I bought the house they live in now, but not out of spite, out of something stronger, out of clarity, out of growth, out of the quiet power you find when you stop waiting for love from those who can't give it. So if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever been cast aside by the people who were supposed to stand by you, stay with me. Because what happened next? That's where the story truly begins. After the will was read, I didn't go home right away. I drove, nowhere in particular, just away. Away from the polished smiles and half-hearted hugs. Away from the casual cruelty disguised as tradition. Away from the house that used to smell like my childhood and now smelled like loss. I ended up parked at an old gas station an hour outside the city. I sat there with the engine, off window cracked just enough to let in the cold. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just sat in silence, staring at my own hands like they were someone else's. That's the thing about heartbreak. It doesn't always come loud. Sometimes it's just a quiet collapse inside you, like a building crumbling without an audience. I replayed everything over and over again. Had I misunderstood my place in the family? Was I naive to believe I mattered the same as everyone else? Or had I always been on the outside and just never noticed? My brothers were always the important ones. The ones my father introduced with pride. The ones who were groomed to take over his affairs, to sit at the head of the table, to carry on the family name. And me, I was the helper, the assistant, the one who stayed behind, who filled in the gaps. They called it being supportive. I see now it meant being invisible, Do you know what it feels like to realize that all your sacrifices were seen as background noise? I gave up a scholarship to stay close to home when my dad's back gave out. I turned down a promotion in another state because I thought he might need me. I cancelled vacations, rearranged my life, and told myself over and over that family comes first. But no one ever said which family member that phrase was supposed to protect. I used to think that being quiet, being loyal, being kind meant something. That if I just stayed consistent one day, they'd see me. One day, I'd be appreciated, not for being loud, but for being steady. But that day never came. Instead, I was met with an empty envelope and a silent vote that said, "You don't matter enough." They didn't have to say the words. The will said it for them. And somehow that hurt even more. It wasn't a fight. It wasn't an argument I could revisit or a misunderstanding I could clear up. No one said, "We're cutting you out because..." No explanation. Just exclusion. It was final. And cruel in how casual it was. For days I told no one. Not even my closest friends. I kept it all locked up inside like it was my shame to carry. I went to work, smiled through meetings, laughed at jokes I didn't hear. And every night I came home and sat in the dark wondering how many other people have felt like this. How many others were erased, not because they failed, but because someone decided they were too easy to discard. And maybe the hardest part was realizing that I didn't want revenge. I didn't want to make them suffer. I didn't want to confront them or scream at them or take them to court. What I wanted was much quieter. I wanted peace. I wanted a space where I could breathe without wondering what I did wrong. A life where I didn't have to earn my worth every day, especially not with people who would never acknowledge it anyway. And most of all, I wanted to prove to myself that I didn't need them to validate me, that I could disappear from their world and still build something beautiful. It's funny how pain can wake you up. In those days after the will, I stopped hoping for a call that never came. I stopped expecting an apology that was never going to be offered. I started doing something else. I started building, quietly, privately, relentlessly. I enrolled in classes again online at night, just me and my laptop and a cheap desk lamp. I started freelancing, saving every dollar, learning about business, credit, real estate, legal structures, not because I had a plan, but because I had a fire. And one thought repeated in my mind like a heartbeat. They may have written me out, but I am not gone. I wasn't out for vengeance. I was out for rebirth, and it began right there in that tiny apartment with peeling paint bad Wi-Fi and the strongest determination I've ever felt. They took me out of the will, but they handed me something more powerful, a reason to rise. I didn't leave with a dramatic goodbye. No slammed doors, no angry texts, no cryptic Facebook posts, just silence. I moved out of the city 2 weeks after the will was read, packed everything into the back of a used SUV I bought with what little savings I had. No one helped me load the boxes. No one even knew I was leaving. And honestly, no one asked. Not once did my phone buzz with a message from my brothers. Not a single call from my cousins. Even the few aunts and uncles who had once pinched my cheeks and told me how proud they were, nothing. I disappeared. And the world around me just kept going. At first it was lonely. I won't pretend it wasn't. The silence was loud, deafening at times. I'd catch myself reaching for my phone to text someone, then remember there was no one to text. I'd scroll through old photos late at night, wondering how something that once felt so permanent could vanish so completely. But slowly, that silence became something else. It became space. And in that space, I started to grow. I worked jobs that barely covered the bills, customer service, online, tutoring, managing spreadsheets for small businesses. I clipped coupons, ate cheap meals, learned to fix things myself. I didn't care about appearances anymore. I just cared about survival and freedom. For the first time in my life, every decision was mine. I wasn't orbiting someone else's expectations. I wasn't trying to please a father who couldn't see me, or brothers who never asked how I was doing. I was finally alone. And strangely, it felt honest. There's something beautiful about starting from nothing. It forces you to be creative, to dig deep, to rely on instincts you didn't know you had. I watched videos at night about real estate and finance, took online courses I could barely afford, built spreadsheets of housing markets, interest rates, tax advantages. I didn't know exactly where I was headed, but I knew I was no longer waiting for anyone to give me permission. And through all of it, birthdays came and went. Christmases, Easters, weddings I wasn't invited to, babies I didn't know had been born. Sometimes I'd see a post from a distant relative pop up on my feed. A group photo with everyone smiling at someone's baby shower. My old seat at the table now taken by someone new. But even then, no one ever said my name. You'd think that would destroy a person, but it didn't. It pushed me. I used to believe that love was something you had to prove yourself worthy of. That if you just gave more, stayed longer, smiled wider, someone would finally choose you. But that's a lie many of us are taught. Love doesn't require begging. Belonging doesn't require performance. And so I stopped performing. Instead, I started building my own life. I saved ruthlessly, said no to nights out, said yes to early mornings, weekend work, and late night learning. I formed a small consulting business, helped others manage their books, write their business plans, improve their systems. And over time it grew. First a few clients, then referrals, then a steady stream of income I never thought possible. I reinvested every dollar I didn't need. And when I finally had enough, I bought my first property. It was a rundown duplex with water damage and a roof that needed replacing. But it was mine. I walked through the front door with paint-stained jeans and calloused hands, and for the first time in years, I felt grounded. I didn't need a family dinner. I didn't need a holiday card. I had keys. I had equity. I had peace. And still, no one from my family noticed. No calls, no emails, no "we miss you." It was like I had never existed at all. But that's the strange thing about being erased. It frees you to rewrite your story from scratch. And my story, it was just getting good. It had been 5 years since I last saw my family. 5 years since the will, since the silence, since I'd packed up my life and disappeared. I thought I had closed that chapter. But then, I saw the listing. It came through a real estate alert, something I had set up months ago, just to keep tabs on properties in certain areas. I wasn't looking for anything in particular, just browsing, until I recognized the address, my father's house, the house I grew up in, the one with the cracked driveway and the blue shutters. I helped him repaint the summer after Mum died. The creaky porch swing still there in the photo. The same front steps where I used to sit on Halloween, passing out candy, because my brothers were always too cool to do it. It was up for sale. I stared at the screen for a long time. At first, I didn't feel anything, just a sort of numb curiosity. Then slowly, a flood of memories I hadn't let myself feel in years crept in: the scent of coffee in the mornings, the sound of my dad's laugh echoing down the hallway, the soft click of the thermostat he adjusted way too often. And then I noticed something else: the seller's name. It wasn't listed as private family home. It was under a trust one that my brothers had apparently formed after inheriting the estate. Of course, they were selling it, to split the profits probably, maybe buy something new, something bigger, something without ghosts. I sat with that thought for a while, and then without hesitation I made a call. Buying it wasn't easy. I had to move carefully, quietly. I didn't want them to know it was me, not out of fear, but because this wasn't about making a scene. This wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming something they'd thrown away. I worked through an agent I trusted, set up the paperwork under my business name, ran every inspection, negotiated like any other buyer. No special requests, no sentimentality, just the cold professional tone they'd always valued so much. And within 6 weeks, the deal closed. I bought the house, the one they had inherited, the one I had been written out of, the house that never had my name on it until now. I walked through it the day the keys were handed over, alone. No cameras, no celebratory toast, just me. The floors still creaked in the same places. The window in the back bedroom still had that chip in the corner of the glass. The wallpaper in the kitchen was even more faded than I remembered. But everything else, it was mine now. I didn't post about it. I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I quietly began to restore it, not to turn it into some shrine to the past, but to give it new meaning, to finally turn it into something that reflected who I had become. I kept some things, the porch swing, the blue shutters. But the rest I changed. Painted. Repaired. Brightened. I didn't want it to feel like a memory. I wanted it to feel like a beginning. And for the first time in a very long time, it did. It felt like home. I wondered if my brothers would ever find out, if they'd check the paperwork and see the business name, if they'd hear through someone that I was back in town, if they'd drive by and pause at the sight of fresh flowers by the door, wondering who had moved in. Maybe one day they would. Maybe they wouldn't. But here's the thing. I didn't do this to prove a point. I did it because I could. Because after all the years of being overlooked, ignored and erased, I had finally stepped into the kind of power they never thought I was capable of. Quiet, steady, undeniable. I didn't need to knock on their doors or demand recognition. I had something better. I had the keys. A few months after I moved in, I got a call from my property manager. He sounded amused. "You're not going to believe who just submitted a rental inquiry for the house." I already knew. Before he said the name, I felt it. That strange electric sensation that runs through your spine when the past knocks on the front door of your present life. It was my oldest brother. Apparently, he and the others had run into some financial problems. The housing market had turned. Plans had changed. One of them was going through a divorce, the other had lost a chunk of his investments. Their idea of selling the family home and moving on hadn't gone as smoothly as they imagined. So now they wanted to rent. The house they once owned. The house they had inherited. The house I had been deliberately excluded from. They didn't know who the new owner was. The purchase had been processed through my company. They assumed it had gone to some distant investor, someone disconnected from sentiment. And they were right, except that investor was me. I told my manager to proceed as if it were any other application. He asked if I wanted to reveal myself, if I wanted to make a statement. Maybe come to the first walkthrough just to see the look on their faces. But I shook my head. This wasn't about that. I didn't want their shame or their regret. I didn't want to be the villain in their story, even if they'd been one in mine. I just wanted to see who they were when they thought no one was watching. So we moved forward. They signed a 1-year lease, paid the deposit. My name never came up. They never asked, and I never offered. On the day they moved in, I didn't drive by. I didn't spy. I simply sat on my back porch at my second home across town, the one I'd bought after the first rental started bringing in passive income. I made tea, read a book, let the moment pass. But the weight of it was heavy in the best way. They were back under the roof where we'd all grown up. Back in the house they had once seen as a stepping stone. Back in the place that had never felt like mine until I made it mine in silence. I imagined them walking through the hallway commenting on the changes. Maybe they'd noticed the new kitchen tile, the fresh coat of paint in the living room, the softer lighting, the warmth. Maybe they'd even feel something they couldn't quite name, an unfamiliar presence in the air. Not threatening, not angry, just grounded, calm, intentionally kind. They had no idea the rent checks they sent each month were going to me. No idea that the owner who fixed the broken plumbing right away, who approved the small garden bed they wanted to plant out front, who kept the property clean and quiet, was the sister they had erased. I wasn't trying to punish them. I was offering something they never gave me. A place to feel safe. Isn't that wild? After everything, they still needed me. And I still gave them what they wouldn't give me: care, stability, dignity. But this time on my terms. I realized then that true power doesn't need to announce itself. It doesn't need revenge or applause. Sometimes it's just the quiet satisfaction of knowing you're the one holding the foundation now. You're the one offering shelter. Not because they deserve it, but because you do. You deserve to be the kind of person who rises not in spite but in strength. The kind who can look at the people who hurt you and say, "You didn't break me, you built me." It was a Sunday morning when I got the call from my property manager again. "She wants to meet the owner," he said quietly. I didn't have to ask who she was. My mother had moved in with my oldest brother after he separated from his wife. She was living in the same house again, the one where she had raised us. The one where, once upon a time, she'd brushed my hair in the kitchen and whispered bedtime prayers in the hallway. Now she wanted to meet the new landlord. "She says she just wants to thank you," he added, hesitating. "She's curious, I think." I sat there holding the phone, my heart thudding. For a moment I considered it, showing up, telling her it was me, watching her eyes search my face for traces of the daughter she thought had disappeared. But something told me it wasn't time. So instead I asked him to pass along a message, tell her the owner wishes her well, and that the home is hers to care for freely. He relayed the message the next day, and according to him, she stood still for a long moment in the living room, one hand on the edge of the windowsill, looking out at the same backyard where we used to chase fireflies. And then, almost too soft to hear, she whispered, "This feels like her." I didn't know what to do with that. Her voice didn't sound angry. It didn't sound regretful either. It sounded sad, nostalgic, like someone searching through time for a version of something they once had but let slip away. I wondered if she had sensed it all along. The fresh scent in the hallways, the way the windows had been cleaned with care, the handmade ceramic planter I'd placed out front, just like the one I gave her on Mother's Day when I was 12. Maybe it was wishful thinking, but maybe, just maybe, somewhere deep in her bones she knew. I hadn't disappeared, I had simply stepped away to heal. And in some strange twist of fate, the home she now lived in had been quietly cared for by the very person she thought she'd lost. I tried not to let my emotions take over, but something cracked open that day. Something I had locked away for years. All the memories I had buried beneath anger, beneath silence, beneath self-protection, they floated back to the surface. I remembered how she used to hum while folding laundry, how she'd leave handwritten notes in my lunchbox, how, when I cried, after my first heartbreak, she sat beside me on the stairs and held my hand without saying a word. She wasn't always distant. She had loved me once in her own way, but life gets messy. Families fracture. People get caught in the storm of unspoken expectations and old wounds. And sometimes, in the process of surviving, they forget how to hold each other. I don't know if my mother ever truly understood what her silence during the reading of the will had done to me. She hadn't fought for me, hadn't questioned why my name wasn't there, hadn't asked where I went when I disappeared. But in that one soft whisper, "This feels like her," I felt something shift. It wasn't an apology, but it was something, a quiet reaching across time. And maybe that was enough. That night, I stood on my own porch across town, watching the sun set over the hills. I imagined her in that house sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea, wondering who had brought it back to life. And even if she never knew for certain, I did. I knew who had turned the story around, who had risen from the shadows, who had chosen grace over bitterness. Me, I never walked up to the door, not once. There were so many moments I thought about it, birthdays, holidays, days when the wind smelled like memory, and the ache for closure pulsed just under my skin. I'd picture myself standing on that porch again, pressing the doorbell, hearing the footsteps shuffle on the other side. Maybe they'd open the door slowly, squint at me, unsure for a moment. Then recognition would dawn. Maybe they'd say my name in disbelief. Maybe they'd fall silent. Maybe someone would finally say, "I'm sorry." But I never let that scene play out in real life, because this wasn't about them seeing me. It was about me seeing myself. And the truth is, I liked the distance. There was something strangely comforting about being near, but unseen. Present, but not involved. I could walk past the house and admire the flowers in the yard, without needing to explain how they got there. I could approve maintenance requests from across the city, knowing I was quietly holding it all together. They didn't know it was me who fixed the roof after a storm. They didn't know it was me who ordered a new water heater when the old one broke. They didn't know it was me who made sure the lawn service never missed a week. But I knew, and that was enough, because healing doesn't always come from confrontation. Sometimes it comes from consistency, from proving to yourself day after quiet day that you've become someone you're proud of, even if no one else sees it. I became the kind of person I used to look for, someone steady, someone kind, someone who takes care of the things they love even when those things once broke their heart. There were times I parked on the corner just to sit in the car and watch the lights flicker on in the windows. Sometimes I'd catch a shadow crossing the front room, maybe my brother with his head buried in a laptop, or my mother setting a cup down by the sink. I'd wonder what they were talking about. Did they ever mention me? Did they think I was bitter somewhere, holding on to old wounds? Did they imagine me stuck in the past, unable to let go? If only they knew. I wasn't stuck. I was rooted, grounded in something stronger than resentment peace, because the most powerful thing I ever did wasn't buying the house. It was choosing not to ring the doorbell. It was choosing not to demand explanations or apologies. It was building a life so full of purpose and quiet joy that their approval simply wasn't necessary anymore. I stayed invisible, but I was always there, in every repaired pipe, in every newly planted flower bed, in every small act of unseen care. I became the soul of a house that once tried to forget me, and that somehow was the most poetic justice of all. I never got the apology. No one ever came to find me. No one said we made a mistake. No one admitted that maybe they should have kept my name in that will. But I stopped waiting for it, and somewhere along the way, I realized something powerful closure doesn't always arrive in a bow. Sometimes it comes in quiet waves through small choices in a life you create for yourself when no one shows up to hand it to you. I used to think I needed their recognition to feel whole again, but I don't, because I found something far better than validation. I found freedom, the freedom to define who I am outside of who they said I should be, the freedom to heal in silence, to build in the shadows, to rise without permission, the freedom to walk past the house I once longed for and feel nothing but peace. I didn't win by proving them wrong. I won by proving to myself that they never had the power to define me in the first place. I bought the house they live in, not to spite them, not to haunt them, but because it was mine too. It held my memories, it held my pain, and now it holds my grace. Every day they live there cared for in comfort, unaware that it's my hand behind the warmth, is a reminder. You can choose compassion without forgetting what they did. You can protect your peace without inviting everyone back in. You can rewrite your story even when they tried to erase you. To you watching this, maybe you've been left out, overlooked, dismissed, forgotten. Maybe someone told you, through words or actions, that you didn't matter. But you do. You matter more than they'll ever understand. And if this story reached something in you, if you've ever felt invisible in your own family, if you've ever had to build yourself from scratch, I want to hear from you. Share your story below, even just a sentence. Comment "I'm still standing" if you've risen quietly too. And don't forget to subscribe, because here we tell real stories, the kind people don't talk about at dinner tables. Stories like yours. This was my truth. Now, what's yours?